Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of the Bleed Los podcast. This week's podcast is brought to you by our good friends at FOCO. If you go to the description for this podcast and you click on that link, it'll take you to FOCO's website. Add whatever you want to the cart, and upon checkout, it'll apply a discount for being a loyal listener to this here podcast. FOCO's super great. They have all the fandom. Bobbleheads, shirts, Hawaiian shirts, sandals, bags, everything. Anything you can think of, they got it. Excuse me. So I sound a little stuffy. Apologies. My allergies are getting me real good. But they also have face masks. So if you want to be like me and have allergies, that's cool too. But if you don't and want to cover yourself up and protect yourself a little bit, get yourself a mask. Again, foco.com. They're fantastic. We appreciate their consideration. As always, terms and conditions do apply. Please see their website for more details. This week's episode is also brought to you by our friends at Bleedlos. www.bleedlos.com. They have all the Dodger fandom that you can think of. If you want the Joe Kelly Fight Club shirt, I know I bring that one up a lot. They got it. Justin Turner El Rojo Chingon, they got it. El Culichi, they got it. Excuse me. So go to their website. www.bleedlos.com. Add whatever you want to your cart, and upon checkout, use the promo code BleedLosPod, and you'll save 10% for being a loyal listener to this podcast. Huge thanks to them for the consideration. Again, www.bleedlos.com. And thank you for subscribing, listening, following us, all that jazz. You could always find us on the Twitter at BleedLosPod. And from there, you'll find our Twitter handles if you want to follow us and shoot us DMs, all that fun stuff. We're all into it. But we thank you profusely for following and subscribing and all that good jazz. And if you're not subscribed, right now would be the perfect time to hit the subscribe button and get that going. But in the meantime, here's another edition of the Bleed Los podcast. And it's your boys Alonso y Juan with the babyface gimmick in the sky, Roger. Real quick, before we dive into something, Juan, I had a question for you.
Yes, sir.
You and I are of the logic, if you will, the school of thought, that if you're given a nickname, you don't get to pick your own nickname, right?
Absolutely. You're right.
So what's your stance on the off-air request of Roger requesting that we call him Babyface X, as in, Babyface? I forgot the actual specific request that I have to pull it. But what was your stance on that?
It was denied. His nickname is Babyface, or the Babyface in the sky. He is not. You're right. He wanted some sort of like badass nickname for us to put behind Babyface, and it's like it doesn't work that way.
You don't get to pick your nickname. Like, do you think
like Babyface Assassin?
No.
Yeah, there you go. The Babyface Assassin. Yeah, that doesn't work.
Babyface Host?
Vetoed. Like, you don't get to pick your own nickname.
We can open up that up on Twitter and see what our listeners think about that. But I'm going with an executive decision right now that's denied. When you are given a nickname, it's because someone else gave it to you, not because you gave it to yourself.
I'm glad that we're on the same page, because I felt disrespected that he tried to push that on us.
I didn't even take it seriously when he said that. I was like, oh, okay, whatever. We're still calling you Babyface.
Oh no, he was serious. I knew he was serious. I mean, you've seen how animated he gets. It was dead ass serious.
And for our listeners, the reason why he is called Babyface is because he thinks, we're all wrestling fans on the show. He thinks that he is the babyface of this show. Meanwhile, he's the biggest heel on this show. And so that's why we call him Babyface. It's an ironic nickname.
And it's not even close how much of a heel he is. It's not even close.
Exactly.
That's fake news.
Again, further proving our point that you are the largest heel in the general vicinity. Bret Hart would be proud of this work.
Yes, a nice, yeah. His heel turn is that in Montreal.
Yeah, it's. But you know what? I'm glad that we were able to clear that up, and then we can just go on to more depressing things like what happened this weekend. We talked a little bit about having, we normally do a rundown and all that jazz, but we're not really going to do that this week because I feel like the San Diego stuff's probably going to take a good bulk of the episode. But and real quick before we dive into it, apologies to everyone that this didn't drop on Monday. I had a family emergency. My bad. We'll carry on. But as we recorded this, the Dodgers down 2-0 to the Cincinnati Reds, and they have begun their series with the Reds there at the Ravine. But over the weekend, they had a 4-game set with the Padres, and it wasn't pretty. Granted, they're in the middle of a bit of a slump, and the injury bug has bit them a little bit. And the Padres obviously are good at what they do too. But how do you feel, kind of after, digesting it a little bit over the weekend or over the day? How do you feel today going into this new week of baseball one?
Well, I got to tell you, I feel much more, I feel differently today as I did last night after the game. Last night after the game, it was the worst feeling in the world. And I think maybe a lot of it was because Babyface was just bringing me down with his ever-present optimism that he shows. But last night was dark times. It was just really dark times. And then when I wake up this morning to the news that the Dodgers are no longer partners with Farmer John Hot Dogs, it just made it even worse. Like, what is happening here? I mean, cats and dogs, are falling from the sky. This is mass hysteria. What is going on? But with all that being said, and this is what was put into perspective after listening to or reading Babyface's rants after the game yesterday. It's April. Okay. There are 162 games in a season. Okay, we have to pace ourselves. And this goes on to a lot of Dodger fans. I don't want to just pick on Babyface here, because if you went on Twitter last night, it was every Dodger fan was having a meltdown.
For the record, I wasn't ranting.
Fake news, son.
I was making valid points.
Every Dodger fan was having a meltdown last night. And this is my message to Dodger fans. Okay, we have to take it one game at a time. Dave Roberts likes to say this a lot. This is just baseball. There's 162 games. Look, I'm telling you this because I used to be like Babyface. And I was going to have a flashback last night. I was resorting to that guy who was going to have a meltdown, in game 22 of the season. That, oh my gosh. So, Dodger fan, just take a step back and relax right now. I know a lot of you guys are pissed that we haven't clinched a division in April, but I got news for you. This is going to be a long season. We have to pace ourselves. The major blowups, the tirades, you can save those for September, or you can save it when the Dodgers are eliminated. Right now, we just have to pace ourselves. I'm going to give you guys some things that might help you feel better. As of today, the Dodgers are still in first place. The Dodgers have the same record that through 22 games this year, they are 15-7. Through 22 games last year, they were 15-7. And last year ended up being pretty good for the Dodgers. So they still have the best record in baseball. Now, those are all the positives I have. I'm sure we're going to spend the rest of the show talking about the dark times that I think are ahead of the Dodgers right now. But again, I just can't stress enough. It's April.
Listen, my perspective on this is now from the fan perspective, because the fan perspective, I feel like, can be aggressive and it could also be a little jaded, if you will, because we have been super, super spoiled for the better part of a year and a half. The Dodgers have really not made or struggled, if you will, had very many slumps that affect the team like the way they are right now. It's April. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So I'm not worried about that. these guys are also adjusting. I've seen a lot of people, and not to pick on you, Roger, but it's just because we were talking about it before, talking about the lack of depth. One thing that no one has really mentioned with the depth being called up and struggling, there's no minor league games right now. There is no minor league games. They're an offsite campus, being a part of the taxi squad, playing simulated games with some of those guys, right? Going from a simulated game to big league games, it's not. You can't even compare. It's night and day. So
I just want to jump in on that real quick, Alonso.
Yeah.
I'll let you finish, but
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. That's a very valid point that you're bringing up, because I think Brusdar Gratterall is rehabbing in the major leagues right now.
Yeah.
If there were minor league games right now, he'd be on assignment right now, getting acclimated. So that's a very good point on your part.
And
exactly.
that's why
I was going to say the same thing. Like the 2 appearances that we've seen Brusdar, he hasn't been himself. And I thought about that today. I'm like, he should have been, in Oklahoma City right now rehabbing. But yeah, no AAA season yet. So back to your point.
And then you throw into the mix that they're slumping and there's injuries. Some of these guys, they didn't get to do the same things that they're accustomed to doing every spring because of COVID, and that affects these guys, right? And as we all know, baseball players are creatures of habit. So once you kind of throw a wrench in the operation, it kind of messes with that. So all in all, though, I feel like it's a bit of a perfect storm, if you will. But you also have to tip your cap to the Padres. The Padres are a legitimate team. Like full, I kept saying in our group text, I want to see the Dodgers and the Padres play each other full strength. And the reason that I do is because obviously the depletion in the lineup and the injuries in pitching are really only affecting one side of the ball right now. Now, are the Padres legit enough that you can say they're better than the Dodgers full strength? I don't think so, but they're right there. I mean, they're right there. I said this before we came on. The Padres, in my opinion, are the best base running team in baseball right now. They're aggressive. They're playing smart baseball once they get a runner on, and once they get someone on, they get aggressive. And we saw that, right? They also like to have fun, and they like to poke fun, and that's fine. I know people are pissed about that sort of stuff. I'm not. At the end of the day, I'm kind of the Trevor Bauer idealist, if you will. Hey, you don't want the dude to show you up. Don't give up the home run. Like, I'm a believer in that. But at the end of the day, the Padres just played the better series. They made, the lesser of the mistakes, if you will. And they also don't really have to worry with as many injuries as the Dodgers do right now. But again, I'm not worried right now. This would only worry me if obviously it continues. But if this was September, I'd be worried going into the postseason, because like as Juan has said many times, the Washington Nationals are the perfect example of what can happen if lightning strikes in a bottle. You make a run and you knock out the mighty Dodgers. You go on and you win the World Series. So I'm not worried. I'm not really stressing. The Dave Roberts feels good about his squad. The pitchers are doing what they need to do. Chris Taylor just missed a home run by like 3 feet, so that sucks. But I'm not overly worried. But who I know is worried, and I'm just kind of curious to hear his take on it, is Roger. I'd like to hear your take on that 4-game setup with the Padres.
I wouldn't say I'm worried. I'd say it was a missed opportunity. Like I was telling you guys, this was a chance for them to get a little bit into the Padres' head. Like I said, they won last weekend series. Yeah, it was tough, head to head. This would be if they would have took 3 out of 4 again. Padres would be like, okay, yeah, we're playing good baseball, but we can't kind of get over that get over the top. And I think that's, if they would have done that and kind of done that again, they kind of would have put that into their head a little bit. They're a confident bunch. Like I said, they're a confident bunch. Now they've put them, super confident. Now they know that they can go with the Dodgers. Yeah, Dodgers are short some players. We'll see how it is when Bellinger's back. If Kaneba would have been there, so we'll see how it goes. Head to head. But like I said, I think the Padres gained so much confidence. They showed they wanted this series more than the Dodgers. I believe. you could see it just in everything the Padres did, the excitement, just everything. It was a playoff series for them. They wanted to win the series big time, and they did it. And like I said, I think it just gave them a lot of more confidence going forward. And we'll see, what happens in the games that come up in June.
Here's one takeaway for me that I know that the injury bug is a legitimate thing. When Clayton Kershaw came to pinch hit, that's kind of when because obviously there's pitchers that can hit. Madison Bumgarner is one of those guys that comes to mind. Kershaw obviously can rake, but when you have a pitcher for the most part coming up to pinch hit, that's never good, in most cases. Now I know the Dodgers were just trying to throw a curveball, no pun intended, to the Padres in that situation, but they essentially, with what they had available, they threw everything in the kitchen sink to the Padres, and the Padres just they played the better series, and you just got to tip your cap and move on. I am curious, to Juan. You had expected, if you will, more from this Dodgers team, and here we are now. Is there anything in particular that surprised you as far as kind of how this series went on the Dodgers side?
What I'm surprised about is, yeah, I agree with Roger's point in the sense that the Padres are up for playing the Dodgers. The Padres are so up for playing the Dodgers that they can't beat anybody else in the National League. Prior to coming into that series, the Padres were at 500. And I still have to remind people, by the way, all this talk about the Padres, the Giants are in second place. And if the Dodgers don't pull through tonight, the Giants are going to be tied with the Dodgers. So the Giants are ahead of the Padres. The Giants have beaten the Padres 2 out of 3 in the only times they've played. But for some reason, the Padres, even though they're struggling against the rest of the league, just get up for playing the Dodgers. What surprises me about these two teams, and we talked about this on our last show, that series in San Diego, the Padres could have very easily won 2 out of 3. But they didn't. The Dodgers did. This series up here in LA, the Padres ended up winning 3 out of 4. I think the Dodgers could have very easily won 3 out of 4. If you have to tip your hat to the Padres, they made the defensive plays. Roger said this off air, and that is that, in this series in LA, the Padres made the plays. The Padres got the timely hits. Down in San Diego, that was the Dodgers. That game on Thursday, Cronenworth made 2 huge plays. Of course, the big one was that double play. That ball gets through. The Dodgers go up in front 4-3 and win that game, in my opinion, I think, because the bullpen will close it out. The Dodgers were in every game this weekend, so it's not like they got blown out by the Padres. The only game they weren't in was the Friday game, and that was towards the end. The Padres just blew it open. But other than that, you could make arguments that they could have won Thursday's game, and they should have won Sunday's game. So they would have won 3 out of 4. And then at that point, the Padres would have been about, I think, 7 games out. And the whole perspective would have been different. Again, this is speaking to Roger's point. I don't know if it changes, though, the Padres' outlook. Even if the Dodgers ended up winning 3 out of 4 and they won 2 out of 3 the first time, I still think the Padres feel confident about how they, match up with the Dodgers. I think the Padres, that's just who they are, which is something I want to bring up with you guys in the sense that, that broadcast, and I'm sure we can talk about it later, hearing Vasgersian and A-Rod just really seemed painful. And Vasgersian, I like Vasgersian, but you can't forget that Vasgersian used to work for the Padres. He used to be the play-by-play guy for the Padres. So I'm sure he has a little bit of a rooting interest to see those guys succeed. But the one thing I want to talk about is how, the Padres have, this attitude. They have this swag that everybody seems to mention about that. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with Tatis doing the eye thing and showing up Bauer and doing the strut. I have no problem with that. My question, I know this is a little bit of a non sequitur, but how is it different what Tatis and Machado does than what Puig did? Puig was crucified for showing personality here. And he was even crucified by his own team, his own organization. the Dodgers always used to give him grief because he showed some personality with the tongue thing and whatever. But Tatis and the Padres do all that stuff, and the national media guys love it. This is great. This is great. Have things changed that much between when Puig was doing it? Or is it just me being a little sensitive to the fact that Puig couldn't defend himself because Puig could not speak the language? Tatis can defend himself because he speaks English. Puig couldn't. I just found that really interesting that all of a sudden we love all this stuff, but when Puig was doing it, he was ruining baseball.
I think it's a little bit of column A and column B. I've always been the type of guy, though, in general, from my time, when I played to when I was in the game, all that stuff, even now, if someone hits a home run off of you, watch it. Because, you've talked about this one. Hitting a fastball is probably the hardest thing to do in sports. So, hey, take a peek, enjoy it. I think the dichotomy, not dichotomy, I'd say the difference between then and now is, so that team that Yasiel was on was a bit of an older team. It was a lot of veterans. Adrian Gonzalez, Skip Schumacher, Nick Punto, Zach Greinke, Clayton Kershaw, guys that obviously we've had a conversation with Adrian, they're pretty no-nonsense guys. Chase Utley, pretty no-nonsense guys that because everyone talks about this. Everyone has their major leaguer. Everyone has their major leaguer that they come up with. Even if you just work in the game, everyone has their major leaguer. My major leaguer was Alfredo Amezaga. That's who I learned my stuff from. And then along the way, those other guys, Jeff Mathis, and then I was lucky enough to be around other guys. But, but they show you the way and show you how to do the right things. Right. So, and I think Yasiel was just thrust into his, and honestly, I feel like we could do an entire series on Yasiel Puig because he's such a polarizing, figure on and off the field. But, but in his case, he was thrust into that culture of Roughnecks, right? Now this current nucleus, this current iteration of all these teams, the Padres, the Dodgers in this particular example, they're pretty young teams. They're pretty relatively young teams. Tatis is what, 24, 23, something like that. Machado Machado and Hosmer are the vets, if you will, out of that infield. So, the cultural change is it's there. Even Trevor Bauer, he may be 30, but he's still kind of a young 30, and he understands, what the kids seek out. Like now it's not even like teams anymore. Kids are like, oh, my favorite player is so-and-so. They follow that player, and it doesn't matter who they play for. So it's just that much of a cultural change from when Yasiel came. It doesn't feel like it was that long ago, but it was 6 years ago when he came up. A lot. That's a generation. In the game. So I agree with you that he was crucified and shouldn't have been, but that's just kind of what the state of the game was at the time.
And Tatis is 22.
22. Sorry, Fernando. My bad.
Babyface, jump in on this. What do you think? Because I know there's certain Padre players that rub you the wrong way.
Yeah, all of them.
Rob Manfred.
Wait, I lost you there. What about Rob Manfred?
That's your answer. That's the reason. Tatis is like this. He's come across as this once in a life, generation player. And Puig wasn't viewed that way. Puig just came in, and I don't know. It's odd because I remember there's guys. You can probably find guys on the Padres team that were upset with the antics that Puig would do. Right? There's got to be somebody on there, Hosmer or Machado, and now they're loving it. They're loving it when Tatis is doing it. But yeah, it's. I don't know. It is odd to see that, that.
But no one in the media ever defended Puig.
No.
Like now, when Tatis and other players show emotion, you have the media going, "This is great for baseball." So that's what I'm saying. It's like what?
No, and that's unfair. It's 100% unfair. But the difference is, though, is if we're being honest, Fernando's looked at as the face of the game right now. And they're gonna protect their golden goose too. I mean, we have to remember that's what MLB does. And I mean,
and I don't know.
Oh, go ahead.
I don't know if it's because over the last couple 2 to 3 years we've been hearing all this like let the kids play, blah blah blah. So maybe that's kind of changed the perspective on some of these media guys too, and they're kind of like, it'd be interesting if Puig was still in MLB and doing the exact same thing like right now, and kind of see if there'd be a difference.
Well, I mean, if we're honest, though, can I just
go ahead, Alonso? Yeah.
One thing with Yasiel is there was always something there with him as far as why some people didn't necessarily want to touch him with a 10-foot pole, right? There was always something there. With Fernando, with any of these younger guys, we don't really have that, right? So that's where the polarization of Yasiel comes into play, because I feel like he's a unique case in this instance, because also the time the era, if you will, that he played in, but also there's other things that are there that are alleged, of course, but nonetheless, that as to why the Dodgers moved on from him too is a part of the thing, right? So we can't dismiss that, because as far as we know, at least with Fernando, at least with Bryce Harper, these guys that tend to do that. Trevor Bauer, of course, has his own baggage, but I mean, these guys that we're talking about in this instance, they don't. There's not really that aura around them either.
Well, I get what you're saying, but I'm just talking about strictly the on the field stuff, with the celebrations, him showing emotion and that stuff, because I get it that Puig had off field situations, especially as his career progressed. He had some off the field problems. I get that. My thing is just at the beginning of his career, when he was actually showing, emotion and all that stuff, it was frowned upon, and he needed to act. And this is a guy who came to baseball late. All these other guys that we're talking about now, Tatis and all these guys grew up in the game. I mean, Tatis his dad played in the game. So these are people that grew up in Major League Baseball. So I just find it really interesting that you look on the Twitters, and Jeff Passan, Alden Gonzalez, you see all these guys go, this is so great. This Dodger Padres series is so great. And all, hyping up all the off the field stuff that these players are showing emotion. And it's just fascinating to me that it changed. And it just made me think of like, wow, well, Puig was doing a lot of this stuff. And when Puig did it, it was just like he needed to act like he's been there, before. Meanwhile, we completely ignore his backstory of how he even got to the league in the first place, for those who don't know. So I wanted to just bring that up, because I just found it very interesting.
I honestly think it's just a generational thing. If I'm frank, I think it is, because I mean, a lot of those names that I just threw out there aren't even in the game as far as players anymore. Adrian Gonzalez. I mean, he's on his self-admitted swan song, right? Trying to get to the Olympic team. Chase Utley doesn't play. Nick Punto, as far as I know, doesn't play. Skip Schumacher doesn't play. Zach Greinke's still playing, but he's in the tail end of his career, right? So it's one of those things where I think it's just that generational gap, because of I mean, now, I've heard Randy Johnson even say, how everyone's throwing 100, whereas before it wasn't like that. It's just that as time goes on, things change. And I think this is one of those things that it has changed. And I think for the better, because one thing that baseball tends to do, not just Rob Manfred, but just baseball as a sport, is, and even players, we get in our own way. We don't let the game evolve and grow in positive ways, whereas someone might perceive it as a negative way, because it's the whole act like you've been there before bit, right? Jose Bautista, Rougned Odor. That's precisely why that conflict happened, because it's the whole, hey, you showed me up. Hey, you need to act like you've been there before. Hey, whatever. And the rest is history, right? So, I mean, do I expect tussles and stuff like that to continue to happen? Absolutely, because you still have your veterans, your David Prices of the world. Even the Mookie hasn't been in the league as long as him, but Mookie, those guys that do the things the right way, the AJ Pollocks of the world, those guys, right? So I just think as time goes on, the stuffiness, if you will, of that sort of stuff, I think is going to go away. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. It's just, I just, unfortunately for Yasiel, I just think he was kind of a collateral damage, if you will, from that, transition from that era to where we are now.
Real quick, like thinking about it, I think it also kind of has to do with who the other person involved was. With Puig, a lot of the times, the other person on the other end was who?
Bumgarner.
Bumgarner, right? So Bumgarner's the old school guy, Puig's the new school guy. So I think that kind of drove the narrative as well. Like, he's disrespecting the game, he's disrespecting Bumgarner. So that kind of drove, I think, a narrative a bit as well. Even last year when Tatis, he hit that 3-0 cookie that he got for, was it a grand slam or something like that, right? There were still people like, what? Oh my gosh, I can't believe he's doing that. So there was a narrative there too, like, that was against Texas, right? So like, I think it kind of depends who's the other person on the other side. The stuff that happened with Bauer was totally cool with it. So everybody's like, oh, it's so cool, he can do that, and we're changing the game. So I think that all kind of played into, what's going on.
And if you watch any college baseball now, dude, those kids are flipping bats like it's no one's business. And I don't think it's bad. Like I said, if I'm throwing 95, 96, 97, 98, 100, and you can hit a bomb off of me, hey, throw your bat. If you want to throw that in the stands, throw your damn bat in the stands. I don't care. Because you hit a 95 mile an hour fastball that's coming at you from 60 feet and 6 inches away. So if anyone needs to make the adjustment, it's me, not the hitter, right? Because the dude did what he needed to do. He did his job. So I've never been, one of those. Is there instances where there's been disrespect? Yeah, for sure. I'm not a fan of dudes spiking dudes. We never have been, never will be. When they before they changed the rule about collisions at the plate, I felt like some guys went out of their way to hurt the catcher, and that was garbage. So, I mean, obviously you have to defend your catcher. You have to defend your guys, right? So, I still think some of that's always going to be in the fray. But as far as like showing up, even when umpires cry about that, I think it's garbage because it's like, no one came to watch you. So it's one of those things where it kind of, to Roger's point, it's a case by case basis because there's always going to be that hard ass, or as Juan says, that red ass. But I think as time goes on, it's just going to be more accepted in the game, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. But let me ask you guys this. And Alonso, you hinted at this, because of, how the Padres were stealing bases all over. In boxing, there's a term that, styles make fights. These two teams, the reason why they match up so well, is it because they have different styles? It seems after watching these two series that the Padres play in a very, very loose way. And the Dodgers are just like stuck in their ways. This is how they do it. This is how they've always done it. And they're going to continue doing this because they know this formula works. We're going to do this. We're going to do this, which I find very interesting because I thought they strayed away from the formula in the playoffs last year and they ended up winning. But do you think that, maybe the Dodgers need to adapt in order to match that energy from the Padres?
So baseball is a constant game of adjustments, right? You could have all the data in the world, but at the end of the day, if you're not executing, it doesn't matter. So kind of as an example, the whole experimenting with moving the mound back a foot, like okay, so you're going to make it easier for 50% of the equation and not let these guys make adjustments. That's stupid. I'm not a fan of that. So I think, the Dodgers, obviously, they're heavily emphasized on analytics and so is everyone else. Right. But they, they hyper focus, if you will, on matchups. And I think that's kind of one of the things that makes them a little vulnerable is that they hyper focus on matchups as far as situational hitting, even situational pitching, especially now with the 3-batter minimum. The Padres there is no caution to the wind. They want to go out there and and just they know what their offense can do, and they know what their pitching can do, and the rest they'll just kind of navigate that as it comes along. I guess the best way to explain it is the Dodgers are probably Floyd Mayweather, and the Padres are probably a young Canelo Alvarez. And they're the old timey veteran is out there, knows what he needs to do, and it may look like he's running, but at the same time he's not, because he has to that fighter knows the calculated risks he's going to take. Whereas Canelo, who's the young brash fighter, is just going out there for the knockout. He's trying to knock out David and trying to do the thing and shock the world. I don't think that's bad. If anything, I think that's what makes baseball, in my opinion, the best sport to watch, because you can go in there with the mindset of, hey, these Dodgers are going to go in there and sweep 4 games because they're better than this team. And psych, they go in there and then they drop the games the way they do, right? So, I mean, if anything, I think it adds to the narrative of give me 162 games for the Dodgers versus Padres directly into my veins. Because I don't think if they played 162 games, consecutively, I don't think all 162 of them would have the exact same outcome, let alone the same expectation as far as like what happened the night before that game, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. But I mean, there's so many factors that we talked into what happened with the Dodgers. One of the things that I feel we haven't touched on is the fact that this team is slumping. And it's not the starting pitching. The starting pitching is carrying this team. I'd be afraid to see where this team would be at if we weren't getting the starting pitching that the Dodgers have been getting. But the fact, and this is not just this week, okay? The Dodgers had a bad week. The Dodgers went 2-4 this week. This is the first time this season that they've had a losing record. They lost their first series of the season. But it's been a couple of weeks now that the offense has been slumping. A lot of these guys now are having these streaks where they're 1 for 22 or 5 for 30 or something like that. You used to play the game, Lazo. How is it? I was telling this to Babyface. It always amazes me in baseball that when a slump happened, like everybody on the team goes into a collective slump at the same time. These guys are struggling. How are these guys going to get out of it?
Well, so I mean, obviously they have to make adjustments. They're seeing the ball well. And credit to Will Smith and Edwin Rios, they're both seeing the ball really well. They're just not executing, and that's a part of the slump, right? So they have to go out and make those adjustments, and whether it's something as simple as, hey, I need to shorten my swing a little bit, or maybe move my foot back X amount of inches. We've seen that quite a bit with Cody Bellinger. Cody's made those adjustments, out of kind of everyone that's on that team. I would say he's kind of the one that's had the more slumps than most, if you will. I could be wrong, but that's just at least from what I can recall off the top of my head. And he's made minimal adjustments, but a part of it is because he knows he's doing everything else right. He just needs to figure out and fine tune that adjustment. It's hard. It's super hard because you go out there in your mind like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to break this slump today. We're going to change this up, because yesterday was yesterday. Today's a new day. And obviously in some cases it doesn't change, but you just got to make those adjustments and trust your, I say this a lot when it comes to pitching, you got to trust your stuff. And same thing when you're a hitter, defensively, you just got to trust your stuff. It's there. You're just, we're all human and we run into those issues, and it's easier said than done. But, once you kind of work through it, then you're good. Cause I mean, right now, the luxury of sending someone down that you can send down to work on those adjustments, like an Edwin Rios, it's just not there. And it wouldn't be beneficial for them to send Edwin Rios down to work on that stuff because there's no games. Working on that stuff in a simulated game, it's not going to help you. Let alone like if you're, like Julio Urias right now, he's struggling. He's at 85 pitches, the top of the 5th. It's a 2-0 count with 2 on and 2 outs. He can't find the strike zone right now. He's shook. So it's one of those things where you have to remember and rely on your stuff, make those adjustments and go do the thing. And you just gave up a hit. So, and he threw a strike. It's just happened to be in that spot where the dude is sitting on a fastball. And that's just kind of the luck of the draw too. So it's one of those things where it's going to take a little bit of time, and you just have to remember to trust your stuff, because again, you've said this a bunch as we started the show. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And if you keep hyper focusing on like what's happening right this second, then you're never going to ever get over that slump. Because again, we've heard a bunch of people say this game is 90% mental, 10% physical. And if you hyper focus on the, what's up here, it's not going to matter if you trust your stuff or not. You're just caught. And I think Luke Rayleigh got hurt. Outstanding. So it's a great time right now to talk about injuries as well, because one thing that we haven't talked about either is the amount of injuries that the Dodgers have. And I'm kind of curious to hear from you, Juan. Out of all those injuries that the Dodgers currently have, is there one that worries you more than another?
Honestly, all of them worry me, because they're kind of injuries I feel like they're having. Like you mentioned this off the air first, and it says you don't think that Mookie's healthy. And this is, you guys were making fun of me at the beginning of the year when I said, I was worried about Mookie's injury because it was a back, and I thought that it might affect him throughout the season. So Mookie was a back. Chris Taylor was out for a couple of days, and now he's back in. McKinstry's an oblique. He's going to be out. It just seems, it's so funny when we had Adrian on, and he was just talking about how the Dodgers would be able to could survive 4 injuries. Well, we're past the point of 4 injuries. And we were talking so much, that this team has so much depth, and this team is just an embarrassment of riches. Well, it turns out that really the depth that they had is in the starting pitching, because when it comes to the position players, right now, that depth is not looking too good. And you bring up a very good point, and it is something that I have lost sight of. The fact that there are no minor league games, and you have these guys that are getting called up, and there are actual game situations, I think that's probably why they're not succeeding, because DJ Peters looks completely overmatched. Rayleigh has not been producing. I mean, if these guys aren't getting regular game time, I mean, how can you expect them to all of a sudden, swim when you're throwing them in the deep end of the pool? Like I said, there isn't one specific injury that's hurting me, that scares me or makes me nervous. It's the fact that there's just so many of them right now, because it just is like, we might just be snake bit. This is just one of those things. I'm glad the injuries are happening now in April, and that we have enough time. I mean, Babyface, you might know, but I feel like there was a couple of years that the Dodgers started off really, really slow. And I think there was one year they were almost like 9 games back or something. And then come June, they just went on this huge tear, and then they came back and they won the division. So I think the fact that the Dodgers right now are struggling, I would be very happy that this is when they struggle. And then towards the end of the year, they get really, really hot going into the playoffs. But it's just right now, I think these are really, really dark times, because on top of the injuries that we're having and the call-ups that we're bringing up aren't performing, and everybody just seems to be in a slump. We haven't even talked about the bullpen and what's happening with the bullpen now, and the way they're managing the bullpen. This whole thing about the rest, this whole thing about not using guys in consecutive days. And I know, Alonso, you mentioned this on I don't know which episode recently, but you had said that you thought that was going to come back to bite the Dodgers in the ass. And I think maybe that's what's happening right now.
Well, I think I've never been a big fan of doing what they're doing, because it's going to throw pitchers off of their game. Now, granted, the Dodgers are also in an interesting spot, because it's hard to say if Kenley can be an everyday closer again, stuff like that, right? And those are very valid questions by the Dodgers to ask. So I was worried about that, but the other reason that I was worried about it is because, these guys for the most part kind of know what their expected workload is, and it kind of allows them to prevent injury. I'm speculating here, right? But I hope that's not what the issue was with Cory Kennedy. I hope that, with the way that they were using him is not what led to that injury, because he's out for a while. I if there's one injury, kind of to piggyback off the question I asked you that I'm worried about Cory Kennedy. Because if you don't have that sort of a setup guy, regardless if he's a closer or even a setup guy, but regardless a high leverage guy, as the Dodgers refer to him, that's worrisome, right? Because we don't know what we're going to get out of Joe Kelly. We don't really know what we're going to, obviously Bruce Star is real time rehabbing, which is fine. Victor Gonzalez has struggled a little bit. So it's one of those things where that injury for me at least worries me, because if you don't have those anchors in your bullpen, that's where it comes back and bites you in the ass. And that's kind of what I've been worried about, that it would kind of catch up to them eventually. And I think it might have. I hope I'm wrong, but I think it might have. But I mean, the other issue too is now David Price is hurt. So you have that super reliever. My man is hurt. He's got I think a grade 2 strain, I think is what I saw on the hamstring.
Yeah.
And that's that's, as someone that's torn his hamstring, that's an aggressive injury, especially once you're on the wrong side of 30. So it's going to be interesting to see in part 2 with Cory, because if, let's say Cory comes back, we'll say, I don't know, they said a few months. So we'll link that up to August, we'll say. That's also a dude that's coming back from Tommy John surgery. So, he's going to have a little bit of time where he's going to need to adjust back to what's going on. And it's that's one of those things why I've been worried about the way they were using the bullpen could potentially catch up to him. The other interesting thing too, as far as, I don't think it's injuries, I just think it's more kind of what they were doing with the bullpen. JT, for instance, is not in the lineup today, against the Reds. So, they have to manage that sort of stuff as well. The NBA term, load management, with some of these guys. But I mean, I am worried about the bullpen now, if I'm honest. I haven't said that to you guys yet, but I am a little worried about the bullpen now.
Well, it goes back to what you were saying in terms of the injuries, but I mean, this is what a long season does, right? I mean, April and May are usually the times of the year, or those months are what you use as a baseball team to identify what your weaknesses are. Okay. And also, I think you probably use that time to see if in-house you have, pieces that can address those weaknesses. I think it's going to be hard because of the fact that they have so many injuries. I don't know if come June, they're going to know whether they truly have in-house solutions to this, or if they're going to have, for me, like I thought for sure they were going to have to make a move for a bench player. That's what would come to the trade deadline. What they're going to be looking for is a bench player. But now with the bullpen, with the injuries that the bullpen's dealing with, now you mean they might have to be shopping for a bench player. They might also have to be shopping for a reliever. And that's the thing. It's just with all these injuries right now, it just makes things really, really complicated. But if they can just stay close, if they can weather this storm, I mean, I can't stress this enough. I mean, Aaron Rodgers was right. Relax. We don't hit the panic button right now, but it does seem right now that the Dodgers are taking in a lot of water on a sinking ship and don't have, enough material to plug the holes. But right now, I think as an organization, Freeman, for sure with all these injuries are probably looking at, we're going to probably have to go outside maybe to address these holes, because we don't know what we're going to really have, what is consistent.
Listen, Freeman is constantly just making to-do lists. That's the kind of guy that he is. He's, hey, these are my short list guys, right? That he's going to go after. I'm not personally hitting the panic button 100% yet, because we're only 22 games into the season, 23 with today. The only reason that I'm worried about the bullpen is an injury to a guy like Cory Kennedy, who they expected to be a heavy lifter, if you will, of that bullpen, going down potentially for a few months. That's a tough blow. That's a tough blow. And that's one of those where I think Friedman is going to look at, okay, if the likelihood of him being out until September is a thing, then let's go see what's in the market. And I mean, the other part of it is too is they may need another arm, assuming that that assuming the bug stays the way that it is with injuries. I'm hopeful that the injury bug doesn't linger all year because that would suck. Um, but I mean, I am curious to see how they do once Cody Bellinger comes back. Once obviously, in my opinion, there's something going on there with Mookie. I may be 100% wrong, but I mean, when I watch him swing, he just winces, and it doesn't seem great. He's playing through something. I feel like, but again, I could be wrong. But I mean, I think the piece that really needs to turn it on and just kind of hold it down, while he's in it, and I mean, it's gonna if he can do it, it's gonna be one of those that's like, damn, it's gonna be hard to take him out of the lineup. It's Chris Taylor. Chris Taylor is right now he just hit a line drive single, and he's when they said that his back was hurt, I was really worried about that because that's the bench player, right? That's the super sub. But if they can keep him healthy, and then either try to get Zach McKinstry back, which obviously we don't know what his timeline is yet, but to get a DJ Peters going, even maybe a Matt Davidson going, something like that, that would be the move. But I mean, again, with injuries, there's only so much you can do. You can't predict those, can't do any of that. I'm still expecting the Dodgers to be in the market for a reliever come July, though. Come the trade deadline, I'm fully expecting them to be in and on at least one reliever. I don't think they'll go after Max Scherzer. There's a lot of rumbling that he's going to be moved. I wouldn't be surprised if he is. It just wouldn't make a lot of sense for him to be a Dodger. So as far as like a relief arm, though, I mean, they're going to look for someone. And here's the thing about Friedman. He's going to trade for someone that none of us have ever heard about. And then that dude's going to be like Max Muncy and just blow everyone out of the water. That's what's going to happen. I mean, look at Sheldon.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing is just right now, I mean, it feels like Murphy's Law. It feels like everything that can go wrong has gone wrong. So if the Dodgers can find a way to weather this storm, I mean, they have a ridiculous amount of injuries right now. They're also slumping at a historic rate. So I think as a Dodger fan, yes, it sucks watching this right now, but I think you also have to just take into consideration that, okay, it took injuries and it took a historic underperformance in order for us to come back down to the league. So
we're nitpicking.
Yeah, we are. But I mean, here's the other thing too. I know there's no logic to this. I know this is not true, but It just makes me feel better to say this. This is the Bill Plaschke curse.
Right.
Bill Plaschke writing that article saying that this is going to be the greatest team ever in the history of baseball. At the time that he wrote that, I think that was just something where it was a hot take. It was to get attention for himself, to get readers and stuff like that. But you don't make a statement like that at the beginning of the year.
No.
Yeah, you make that statement because you want to be the guy who says, well, I said it first, right? That's an article that you write when you, at the end of the year, when everything is said and done and you have a record and you can go back and say, you know what, this team was better than the 98 Yankees or stuff like that, right? Do I think the Dodgers bought into that and, believe their own headlines? No. We talked about, is this a World Series hangover? I don't think it's a World Series hangover because they were playing really well. It's just that the injuries happen. And then also, I don't think you can factor in underperformance. That's not something in baseball, it's the numbers, right?
Yeah, you don't plan for that.
Exactly. This guy, this is what he gives us every year. So we're going to project on what he gives us every year. And you don't factor in that, hey, this is the year that that 1 year that he sucked, so it's a slump right now that a lot of these guys are going through. So it is tough, but before we go, one thing I do want to get into is Dave Roberts. And that is, I know I'm very quick to blame Dave Roberts for some of the moves that he makes, because I just feel the manager's job is to put his players in a position to win the game.
Right.
Some of the moves that he made, and I'm not putting it all on him as to why the Dodgers lost the series with the Padres. But some of the moves that he made were head scratchers to me. That just makes me feel like, how many games a year does Dave Roberts actually cost the Dodgers with some of these moves that he makes? The defense has been poor this whole year. And I wonder if the defense is poor because so many guys are playing out of position, so to speak, because we've had to move around because of injuries and stuff like that. But when Dave Roberts pulled Noisy in that game and pinched hit with Rios, I didn't understand that, because Rios has been struggling. Noisy struggled at the beginning, but I feel like Noisy's starting to come around. So I would have loved to have seen him continue to have plate appearances, to maybe build on that. But this is why I had mentioned to you before, in the sense that I feel the Dodgers are so set in their ways. And this is how we do it. This is how we've always done it. We're going to come around. We have success with this formula, so we're going to stick to it. And when your team is slumping the way it is, I feel like you have to do something different, right? You have to try something to shake them out of it. I'm just curious, what do you think of the job that Dave Roberts has done so far?
I think he's done a great job, all things considered. I mean, right now they're 7-3 at home and 8-4 away. That could be a lot worse. Also with the injuries, listen, man, injuries, they're just one of those things, to your point about, how everyone looks at numbers based on productivity, right? It's everyone, so-and-so's contract year, walk year, whatever. Typically that means they're going to have an upper of a year. And then after that, it's an outlier. All things considered, man, Dave Roberts, I feel like it's unjustifiably crucified. I get the pressure that comes with the job, because it's, whether it's the Dodgers, whether it's the Yankees, whether it's the Red Sox, those are the more traditional high pressure jobs. So it comes with the territory. And I think Dave, manages it great. The thing about that formula, though, is, we can sit here and nitpick that formula, but it also won them a World Series. So, and it's also built these teams that we currently have. So it's a proven method, and it's gotten the Dodgers 8 consecutive division titles, and how many pennants? 3 pennants, 4 pennants, and a World Series championship. So it's one of those where it's kind of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it type of deals, right? Do you need to make adjustments? Yeah, absolutely. You have to, because there's going to be different players in the system and all that jazz. And I think Dave, all things considered, manages that the best that he can, because right now he's just, he's been dealt kind of a bummer of a hand. You can't control those injuries, but he's doing a great job, at least, given the circumstances. Because at the end of the day, let's say Dave is the catalyst as to why all this stuff has happened, right? Who are you going to replace him with? Who are you going to go out there and go pick up tomorrow that's going to be better than Dave Roberts? And I don't think that there's anyone that's better than him right now. There is other managers that are on the same level as him, but he's one of the best. And it's kind of hard to knock that because of how he manages stuff and is able to kind of get the best out of his players. And that's what you want out of a manager. You want that dude that's, being put in the example that I always go to with Dave, all those years that they had to deal with the platoon of the outfield, all the ego that's out there. I don't think any other manager, unless Phil Jackson was a baseball manager, could have managed that better than Dave did. And Dave is kind of our Zen master that the Lakers had in those 2000s teams when, Kobe and Shaq were there. So, it's one of those things where it takes a very unique individual to be, kind of an elite manager. I think Dave is earned that right and earned that title to be, called an elite manager, if not the best in the game, because of what he has to kind of deal with. Because it isn't just the clubhouse; it's what's coming from upstairs too.
No, I agree with you. And to be clear, I'm not calling for Dave Roberts' head.
No.
But
I
just do feel that sometimes, everybody's quick to blame the players. They suck. They're not. I get it. The players are the ones that have to execute everything. But I think sometimes managers have bad games too, or they have rough patches. right? And it's just some of the decisions that he made. And I know, Babyface, jump in on this. I know you were having a conniption because you saw Rios in the game again tonight, and Rios is now hitting under 100. So, I mean, part of it is because of the injuries, and he probably doesn't have anybody else to throw out there, and also because Turner needs to get his rest. But I just wonder, can we get a little more creative to try to, break out of this?
Can I say one thing before Roger says his thing, real quick? In my opinion, the reason they're using Edwin is just because of his prior successes in pinch hitting, and that's one of those the thing that Juan was alluding to. It's the game getting in its own way, and because it's they're looking at like that historical stuff. But I just wanted to say that real quick because I also think that Edwin should be sent down to work on his stuff, but there's no minor league games, so I'll leave it at that.
So
Go ahead,
real quick. So getting back to Roberts and like the way things were being managed, and with Rios, like going back to yesterday's game. What was it? So the 9th, the 10th, they had a chance to win, right? And then even in that last inning, I'm like, how do they not score a run to tie? You're the home team in this new game with the runner starting on second rule, whatever, right? So you think you should at least be able to push across a run, right? One run, and then to at least tie the game. It's like my thing was like, how did that leadoff runner not even get to third base? It's like they didn't even get him to third base. Like you had guys like Rios coming up, they're shifting on Rios, giving them all the third base side open. It's like you would think, okay, he could drop a bunt, right? But these guys don't know how to bunt. And this is another, we can
do you
probably
think
do a
it's
whole
that they
show
don't,
on this.
Do you think it's that they don't know how to bunt?
They don't know how to bunt.
They don't want to bunt.
No, they don't want to.
They don't.
They don't know how to.
They don't practice it. They don't
exactly.
do it.
They don't practice it because they don't want to. They don't subscribe to it. And this is why it was so refreshing to watch the Padres this weekend beat us. They just straight out, and Robert said this, they straight out outplayed the Dodgers. And it's because I feel like the Padres were just throwing everything in the kitchen sink at the Dodgers, while meanwhile the Dodgers were like, no, this is what we're going to do. This was the game plan going into the season, and this is what we're going to do. Go ahead, baby.
I mean, but for reals, I mean, if he's struggling and he's got that whole side open, he can't drop a bunt, to get him going, Even when Kershaw came in with pitch, I thought that Kershaw was either going to walk or I thought he was going to bunt. I don't know why they didn't try bunting and try the safety squeeze with him, because I think he would have got it done, and I think they would have scored and won in that game.
Yeah, and there was one out. It was a perfect situation for a squeeze.
Yeah. So right now, Max Muncy just struck out with 2 on and 2 outs. Right. I feel like their at bats are forced, and that's not how you're going to get out of a slump, by forcing it. And Max right there definitely was looking fastball, and I forgot who was just pitching. They just pulled him, but homeboy just threw just 3 strikes or 4 strikes in a row, and there were fastballs. So and his whole thing is he just went in there and it's like, all right, this dude's just going to swing, so he's going to swing. And obviously opposing sides are going to catch that sort of stuff. If these dudes are slumping and they're just going to swing at whatever you throw, so just you don't necessarily even have to throw a nasty breaking ball of any kind. You could throw a fastball even right down the middle, and if you're just in a slump, you're in a slump. And that's unfortunately that's just kind of a part of the game too, is those adjustments. But I do agree that in some of those instances, in those scenarios, they should have bunted, and if not even bunt, make the pitcher work his count, right? Make those outs tough, as they say. And the Dodgers haven't done that, so I don't necessarily think it's that they don't necessarily want to or anything like that. I just think they're in that slump, that phase of the slump where they just don't. Oh, I suck. I'm going to get sent down. I suck. This is just not going to go well for me. And that's perfectly normal in the game too. You see guys, and I think that's just kind of where they're at in the slump right now.
I mean, it's a good point, and I know we're going to be wrapping up right now, but one thing I just want to bring up before we end the show is, you mentioned it right now, Alonso, and that is, I feel this team takes way too many pitches. I know that this is their approach, but I feel like sometimes they get a strike right down the middle, and that's a pitch. I mean, the only guy who probably you don't have to worry about that is Corey Seager, because Corey Seager's always hacking in the first pitch or second pitch that's up there. But I feel like these guys take so many pitches, and I mean, all season long, all I've been seeing is the complaints about the strike zone and stuff like that. You know, you want to make baseball a more enjoyable game. You want more people, more fans to watch the game, and force the strike zone. Make these guys have to swing the bat. And maybe it's just because I was a huge Vladimir Guerrero fan, and I subscribe to the Dominican theory in the sense that you don't walk off the island, you hit your way off the island. I mean, Vladimir Guerrero would swing at pitches at his shoelaces, right? And he never had an excuse. And the guy was a 300 hitter, right? So I just wish that, especially because I watch too many Dodger games, and that's my main focus, I just wish these guys would swing the bat more, because I feel like they're just looking for a pitch just in this specific zone. And if it's not in that zone, I'm not going to hit it. And these pitchers are just too good. They're going to paint the corners on you. They're going to hit locations. I wish these guys would just be more aggressive at the plate.
I think that's the one thing that's missing from from them right now, because that's one of the things they're slumping is they're being aggressive. But I mean, I will say this: the way that the umpires enforce the lower half of the zone, it's been garbage. Like it's been like not even been consistent. Like some of these pitches, like listen, I know some of these umpires. Todd Tichenor is an old friend, and that dude has one of the more consistent strike zones. His zone wasn't very good the other night, and the same can be said for the rest of those guys in that crew. And that's not even a knock or disrespect. It just umpiring, I feel like, took a step back this year, not just against the Dodgers, but just in general. There's plenty of other examples. And that's one of those things where baseball gets in its own way. Instead of enforcing the zone, like you said, Juan, stuff like that happens where they're trying to work the zone, if you will. And, but back to the original point, I feel like the Dodgers are, that's one of the things that they're forcing at bats. They want these pitches in a certain zone, and obviously no one's going to throw it, over the outer half, because that's where you want it. So it's one of those things where that's going to be a part of them figuring out what's going on to get out of the slump. But until they do that, I'm all for a patient at bat, but I do agree with you. I think they're taking a one too many pitches in some cases.
Hey, Babyface. Well, real quick. Alonso, you're right in terms of the umpiring. It's probably the greatest rivalry in baseball right now. To quote Dan Clark, it's Angel Hernandez versus the strike zone. I think that is one of the great rivalries of the season. But Babyface, what I wanted to ask you before we end the show right now is, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Just hope we don't have another loss tonight. That might
all I heard was pain. That's all I heard. You know those memes, that you see on the Twitter machine of like, the whatever sports team, and then it's like their star player, and then it just says pain.
Yeah.
That's all I saw right there. Dodgers beat tweet, Dodgers beat logo, pain. That's all I saw.
No, I mean, I think the injuries are catching up to them. Yeah, I didn't. Back to what you were talking about, the bullpen being hurt. I think that's the biggest thing right now. Because you have Knebel down, and don't forget you got Price down. Those two guys are big factors in that bullpen. Knebel, when you Price, being the starter, that sense they expected big innings from him, and now those two guys are down. That's two big holes in the pen. And like you guys were saying, just the depth isn't there right now. You have guys like Rayleigh struggling, and Noisy struggling, and Peters. I don't know what was going on with him, but he got sent back down again. So hopefully he I mean, we know he's either a home run or strikeout. So hopefully he gets that worked out, and we'll see him again. But yeah, just once we get over this injury bug, I'm hoping it won't be too long, but it's not looking good right now.
Last thing, how soon before we start sacrificing a chicken? Because somebody drank Joe Boo's rum. because this is what's happened. I mean, there's no other explanation for them to go into the slump that they're in and to have the number of injuries. It's because somebody, who do you think in the Dodgers dugout drank Joe Boo's rum?
If I were to take a wild guess, it would either be Walker Buehler or Justin Turner.
You know who I think did it?
Who did it?
I think it was Babyface.
Wow, that was some serious
Babyface, just admit it.
allegations.
Babyface, admit it. When you walked into the game tonight to tell Julio, hey, man, I think you might pitch a no-hitter, you drank Joe Boo's rum, did he?
So for context, for those of you that aren't in our group text, there will be times where a pitcher, I'm not going to say anyone's name because I don't want them to be jinxed, but a pitcher will be pitching for the Dodgers, and they'll be, three, through three and a third, and they won't have any hits. And what's the first thing that Roger says? Juan?
He's pitching a no-hitter.
Party foul, man. Like it's one, like if I walked into a clubhouse right now and did that, I would be banished for life. Straight up. I'd get kicked. Like, those, how we talked a little bit ago about hey, if you run over my catcher, I'm gonna throw at you. I would get thrown after that. So it's
if I find the picture of Babyface drinking Joe Boo's rum, I'm totally posting that on the Twitter.
Please do, because if you don't, I feel like you're doing a disservice to everyone. Last question, and then we'll wrap this up. Just give me a name, both of you. I'll start with Juan. Who do the Dodgers need a big week from this week?
Oh, that's a good question. I think they need Seager. Seager needs to come back. He is the number 2 hitter. We saw it in the playoffs. That guy can carry a team, on his back. So Seager needs to recap. And I know they've been facing better pitching, and that's a reason. I mean, they got the Reds these 3 games, but they're going to be in Milwaukee this weekend, and Milwaukee's red hot.
Babyface?
I think Mookie lights the fire. I think once he gets going, he lights it. I think he'll trickle down to the rest of the lineup.
I'm going with Chris Taylor. I think Chris Taylor needs to have a big week, not only because he's the super sub, but obviously he's in a current everyday player role. And he has the ability to, once he gets stuff going, that it kind of lights the fire under everyone's ass. One stat real quick, as obviously this is from, the last 3 weeks, I guess, going into the Brewer series, as we look ahead, they're 4-6 at home. So that should be a pretty interesting series as far as the Dodgers going to town over there, and also because they've been red hot. So it's going to be interesting to see them. They're 6-4 in their last 10. So Dodgers are 5-5. So it could also be the whole that they could have flipped their series prior by a game or two as well. So that's going to be a fun series either way. So I look forward to that. But on that note, this was a good one. We were able to vent a little bit, and Roger's never going to be allowed into a clubhouse after this episode. I know it. It's like how
Don't touch Joe Boo's rum, Babyface.
Don't touch anything. Just don't whatever. It's like I told you, whatever you're thinking, don't will it into existence, because then we're here, and then Juan can't stop laughing, and that's my favorite part about it.
I don't know what you guys are talking about.
If I jokingly said before we started recording this, I should have recorded the first 10 minutes, because the first 10 minutes just Juan couldn't even say a word without laughing.
Just the image of Babyface sitting on the dugout next to a pitcher saying, "Hey man, I think you're going to pitch a no-hitter tonight." It's hilarious to me.
And all I see in my head is the pitcher just giving the death stare right away. It's so good though.
I think we got to go now.
On that note, we'll end this week's episode. Again, huge thanks for listening, subscribing, rating if you have. If you haven't, please hit that subscribe button, and you'll know when this new episode drops. But thank you again. It's your boys Alonso Juan and the babyface gimmick in the sky, who tried to pick his own nickname and was also shot down on that. Roger. This is the Bleed Los podcast, a Dodgers Beat production. We'll catch you next week.